Welcome, everybody. We're here in episode 2 of our Resilient Social Work podcast. My name is Marilyn Mejia-Pena, licensed clinical social worker. I am the founder of Resilient Social Work, and today it's a very special day. I'm here with my sister, and I'm going to let her introduce herself, but her name is Nancy Mejia, and I am so glad to have her here today, and we're going to talk about a topic that I think is going to hit a lot of people or hit home for a lot of people, and is immigration, coming to the USA. Um, but I'll let my sister introduce herself. As she's thinking of it.
Like, what do you want to know?
She's a fellow social worker,
Yeah.
but okay.
So let's see. I have a background in social work and public health. I'd say I've done more work with the public health stuff. Um, I'm a new mom. My baby just turned 1 year old, and that's been a whole journey. Um, I don't know. What else do you want to know about me?
Um, well, we're gonna learn a lot more about you in a little bit. Didn't know that's what you signed up for,
I'm
but
the youngest, so there's three of us. I'm the youngest, so there's what, like a 7 age difference
yes.
between us. So I
Mhm.
think that's important too to say about how different our experience was when we came to the US.
Yes. So, as a fellow social worker, and we're missing our brother, right? So I think maybe we'll bring him to the next one so he can share his own experience as well. But just time wise, just to give you a setup, it is late. We're here at 8:47. That is late for us. So please bear with us as we do this podcast for you. Um, Again, because we think it's super important to talk about, and we'll see what comes out of it, because I'm curious to see what your experience. It was definitely different than mine, in coming to the US because I was older. So to set it up for you guys, we came to the US. We are originally from El Salvador, and we came in 1987. So in 1987, we were lucky enough to be some of the few that already come with their papers. So we came legally to this country. We flew from El Salvador. We stopped in Miami, had a layover there for like a little bit, and got our green card there as soon as we entered the US.
See, I don't remember any of that.
Yeah. And then we flew to New York, and we lived in the Bronx. So I was,
University Heights.
I was 12 years old, and Nancy was
I was 6.
6 years old. So 12 and a half, almost 13. So like I said, our experiences were different. So I'm going to give the floor to Nancy because I want her to share what she remembers, right? What her experience was of leaving our country, going to the US, and not knowing the language, and just adjusting, right? Adjusting to the new life, new way of living, which I think if you are an immigrant like us, it's a very personal journey and difficult journey that we don't really talk about because we just move on. So,
Yeah, it's true.
we just move on. We are just living our life, surviving. And then we don't talk about our experience, which I think is very significant and hopefully brings light to that topic. But tell me about you, sister. How was it for you being 6 years old? So go back.
Yeah. I guess I was 5 and turned 6 a couple months later because we came in August and my birthday's October. I don't really remember the details of like packing, leaving the airport, getting on the airplane. I don't have any recollection of that. I remember some parts of like our life in El Salvador, like going to school, my friends. We used to go to this Catholic school. The nuns loved me. I was their favorite. I remember I started going when I was like 2 or 3, like really little. Um, so I remember, remnants of life over there, but I have no recollection of the move. And I just remember when we were already in the Bronx. We got there in the summer. Um, but I had to start a new school. We went from being like having a house where we knew everybody in the neighborhood and we were outside all the time. There was a lot of family around, to like having to live in a two-bedroom apartment where our family shared a room. It was my uncle's apartment, so he slept in one room, and then our family of five slept in another room. Um, so having gone from having, sort of this very tropical life, warm, being outside, to going into this very urban experience, living in, a building in a very dense city, having to share space, very small space. And then we all lived in this building called 2440 Web Avenue, 2440. Like we had aunts that lived there, cousins, family, friends. It's almost like the ethnic enclave. Like somebody moved there first, and then the rest of us came and moved into that building. So like it was 5 floors, and we had our aunt like on the fifth floor, our other aunt on the third floor, and like that. So I remember that I liked that. I remember that there was a sense of family, even though we live very like crowded. I felt like we used to celebrate, have parties for the holidays and get together. Those are some of the positive memories. But I think in the beginning it was really hard to adjust. I had to go to a new school. I didn't speak the language. They did have bilingual education in New York at the time. So I remember the first year, I was in a bilingual classroom. But it was still weird. I was also like, now went into a very diverse classroom where we had kids that were Dominican, Puerto Rican, Korean, Black, like there was the whole spectrum. And I wasn't used to that, right? I hadn't experienced that in El Salvador, but at least I was not the only kid that didn't speak English. So that was a sense of comfort. Um, but I remember it was hard. My mom says that I would cry every day, and sort of say "me quiero ir para mi casita," which means like I want to go home. I don't remember that, but that's something that my mom has told me several times. So I'm sure the adjustment was hard. I remember also, having to learn English. That was hard. I remember I used to get made fun of because I didn't pronounce words the way that you were supposed to. And the kids would tell me, like, oh, what color is this? And I would go, jello. And they would ask me again and again, and they would laugh, and I didn't understand why. And then I realized, like, oh, I'm saying it wrong. So you're 6 and you're
Yeah.
experiencing things like that.
I'm 50 and I'm still get butthurt when my husband corrects me. I'm like, leave me alone. It's my ESL.
Yeah, so those are some of the things I remember, but it was a very different world, a very different lifestyle. So I think being so young, like I think had its pros and cons. Like I think I adapted quickly, but it was also very hard to leave everything you knew and just have that sudden change. And I think the hardest part was like not having any friends and having to like make those friends and figure that out, especially at school.
Yeah. School was hard. It was a hard adjustment. Definitely. I think it's, you don't remember so much the grief, but the grief was intense. So I think when I think of our journey here, what I want to validate for people that have moved from their homeland is the grief and loss that's attached to that. Oh my God, it was immense. I can say I was depressed pretty much my whole teenage years, because I missed it, right? So, like Nancy said, we were, my roles changed. So for her, she was 6, but for me, I was 12 and a half. So we went from a home where my mom was a homemaker, she stayed home, my dad worked, to now we have two parents working. So that means that the oldest one, which is me, right, had a different role to take, which was of the parenting role, which I didn't ask for, first of all, right? We just kind of landed there because that's what happens, right? In order for you, when you move to a different country, you have to adjust, and that was part of the adjustment And the way that our family was able to function is that I had to step into the parenting role, and therefore, goodbye to my freedom. We were pretty free in El Salvador, where we would just play outside. We played outside. We would come home, you know, the whistles. I don't know if people still talk about the whistles here. Every family had a whistle, so they will like, they will do their whistle and call us when it was already dark, and that's when we came inside the house. But before that, I mean, we were just playing outside. And then we come to the Bronx, to New York. We are pretty much caged in there because of the weather. It's cold, right? So it was cold. It wasn't safe. Remember, this was the 80s. This was when the crack epidemic was just, exploding. Um, we didn't know the language. So the grief about the changes that were there were immense. That's what I recall. So I do remember leaving. We had a dog. I miss my dog. Oh my God. I cried so much. I remember saying goodbye to everybody still, in our house. And we came from a small town, so everybody knows each other. So a lot of people, our neighbors had come. We do our hugs. Family also came. We do the crying. So everybody's crying. I remember the trip, on the in the car to the airport, again, just kind of crying because it hits you like, oh my God, we're leaving. This is scary. This is also exciting because it's a different place, that we're gonna go discover. But at the same time, it's scary. We don't know what's there. I don't know the language. And the sadness, the melancholy, the longing of wanting to go back. Like, I just want to go back home. Like Nancy saying, I wanted to go back home. I want my friends, because it was very lonely. At the beginning, it's extremely lonely because, again, it's a new neighborhood. You start a new school. You don't know the language. And there was a lot of discrimination. I was in eighth, ninth grade combo class when we came, and in junior high, and there were race wars. I remember they used to take us down at different times so that the fights wouldn't be as intense when we got out of the classroom. This is something that my parents don't even know because, again, they were working. So, it was scary. It was scary as hell. I remember walking to school and seeing all the earrings, right? The salt and pepper earrings. Remember those ones?
Yeah,
um, those earrings were like would line like on almost close to the class, to school because the girls would get into fights, and I would be like, nope. I put my blinders on and like just look forward, don't make eye contact, just stay on your path, stay out of trouble. I'm not trying to get jumped by anybody. And thankfully, you know, I never had to get in a fight, but I also was the kind that had to be invisible, right? So that's one of the things that I learned, and I think we've talked about this, that you learn to adapt, but there's certain things that keep you, the survival tools that you pick up along the way, right? I had to learn to be invisible and not seen so that I wouldn't be identified as a target, you know? Um, and therefore I was little, right? I couldn't shine my light. I needed to be the quiet one. I needed to be the one that goes with the flow. I needed to be the one that's the mediator, or not even get in the middle. Like, I'm just out of all of that. I didn't want that at all. So it was really scary. Um, and then the other piece of that was, again, the parenting role. I had to go pick you up and Ronald, right, from our brother from school after my school. And
and your school was far.
it was far. It was far. So again, going from, the my mom staying at home, to now I have to figure it out myself, right? I had to figure out how to get myself home. I had to figure out how to, I had to go make dinner. So that's why when I learned how to cook, because I had to have dinner ready. I had to make sure that you and Ronald, had done your homework, um, do chores in the house or whatever, because our parents would get home like at 7. But walking home from school, I mean, or to school was also dangerous. So we lived in the ghetto. We were not in a nice neighborhood. Again, crack epidemic, the little red vials, remember those?
I don't
No.
remember.
So,
I just remember glass. You broke. Remember one time we were walking and there was glass like everywhere all the time, and we
yeah.
cut ourselves with walking the dog.
Yeah, but I remember walking through the alleys, right? Sometimes to go pick you up. Very lonely road. So thank God nothing ever happened to me. You learn to puff yourself up too, and that was one of the first things I learned, because have to get like you have to get big, and tough, to kind of not look like a target, and go through the scary streets, yes, with the little red and they're the little glass vials, plastic vials, where the crack was in, but those lined the streets
Did you
all
know what
through.
they were
Yeah,
at the time?
yeah, but you're young, right? So what are you gonna do? That's where you live, and that's most of the people, in poor neighborhoods. Like that's where you live. So what do? You adapt,
I just remember like I had to take the bus. I don't know if I was
Yeah, you.
already. So I think I was supposed to be what in first grade, but
Mhm.
then they skipped me first grade. So that was the other thing, is that they said, "Oh, she's already like advanced." And in El Salvador, we were in a private school.
Yeah.
So I think like I already knew the math, I knew a lot of things, and so they decided to put me in second grade. Um, but because my mom had to go to work, and my dad, like transportation was an issue to get back
Mhm.
home. So I remember that they would make me lie to go on the school bus. Like the school bus would take kids closer to like the end of our block. So I think it would only take kindergartners and first graders, or maybe just kindergartners. But I had to like go on the bus all the time, and the bus driver knew that I was not that little, and I had to lie and say, "Yes, I am," in my limited English, so I could go home. But that was like something that I had to do like very young, because my mom, like they felt that that was
Sure.
safer, because your school was far, and so
Yeah.
like for you to get here, sometimes you wouldn't make it on time, and I had to go also learn to get on the bus by myself to go home.
Yeah, we were very independent. And I mean, that obviously that was all the kids in our neighborhood. We were all latchkey kids, we were all on our own, because our parents were working. So one of the things that I remember that, like I said, the grief and loss was one of them, and that was horrible. So I think, like I said, it's one of the most painful experiences, that I think or the lessons, right? The grief and loss lessons that I've had in my life. That's where I learned longing. That's where I learned melancholy. That's where I learned, that immense black hole that you have in your heart that can be filled. It can be filled because no matter the new stuff, it's not going to fill it. You're longing for your lifestyle that you had before. You're longing for your friends. You're longing for the people. You're longing for the smells, for the foods, for the warmth, for the music, for just the lifestyle. So that's really hard. I don't know how many years it took. Like I said, I think all through high school because we also moved. Like we were in New York for like 3 years and then we moved. So what when we were already adjusting, that's when we moved. It's like darn it. Um, but talking about roles, some of the things that I learned too, or that were difficult, like I said, is in taking on the new role, is that I really long to be the kids in the corner. I don't know if you remember, but like El Chino, right? Like El
Hmm.
Chino and his friends, our cousin, we call him El Chino. Um, but he was in the corner with his friends. Those were the popular kids, and I longed to be that. Like I wanted to be have that freedom, but also have the friendships because I didn't. I didn't have friends until I was like in ninth grade, and then I also had responsibility, so I couldn't be in the corner. So I remember being very resentful about that with my parents for a long time because it's like I can't be a kid, I can't be a teenager like the other kids because I have to be at home, you know. Um, and now I look at it as a protective factor because that saved me. Because we know what happened to the kids that were in the corner, right? So at that time in the Bronx, again, drugs were exploding. So you either sold drugs, did drugs, tried to avoid drugs, um, or, ended up pregnant, right? If you were a girl. So that happened to some of those kids that were there in the corner, to a lot of them. So it was a protective factor that in the end it worked out for me. But at the time, I was really resentful because I wanted to be that, right? That's what normal teenagehood is during those times, kicking it in the corner with your friends.
I want to belong and fit in.
Yeah, you wanted to belong and fit in. So that didn't happen. So the friendship was really hard. The loneliness, I think, was very overwhelming. The sense of responsibility. There was a lot of anger, a lot of resentment, a lot of woulda, coulda, shouldas, right? Like I wish I was that, I wish I was this. I would, at the same time, the invisibility, because I had to be invisible in order for me to survive that environment. For the junkies to not look at me, right, when I'm passing by, me also not looking at them so that I can just walk by them, um, and make it. So yeah. So what about you? What are
But
some of the things that you can think of that were traumatic for you or that were wounds?
I think for me, it was also the fitting in. Like, I was so little, but I felt like I remember, like, the clothes that I wore were never
Mm-hmm.
right. And
Yeah.
people would let you know.
Oh
I
yeah.
remember I have this memory of looking in the mirror at some point and thinking like I was fat.
Mm.
And I was little and I was
Yeah.
skinny, and I'm like, that's what the US did to me, right?
Yeah.
Like, so fast and so early on, like there were these issues of like self-image that I didn't experience in El Salvador. Um so stuff like that. I remember, yeah, this sense of like I was so little, and also the fear even of like having to lie to get on the bus, because I was like, "Oh my god, if the bus driver doesn't believe me or let me on, like I'm going to have to walk home by myself." And I did
The
have to do
fear.
that.
That was fear. Mm-hmm.
I did have to do that a few times. Or am I going to get in trouble? Like, I'm breaking the rules of the school, like am I going to get caught? Like, what's going to happen?
Your
You
little
know?
Catholic school self.
Yeah. So those things seem little, right? But for like
Yeah.
a 5 or 6 year old, it's like, I don't know what impact that has. But I think, that's just New York. Like you said, we moved a few times. And I think for me, what stuck with me is it was always hard to start over. It was always hard to make friends. We were so young that they were like very impressionable ages each time we moved. So I think the last time I was an adolescent,
Mm-hmm.
and it just felt like I was never fully accepted. I never fit in the way I was supposed to. And I think that did things to me throughout the
Mm-hmm.
course of my life, right? Like the people pleasing, like, are people gonna like me? How I dress, what I say. Like, it's interesting when you say the whole invisibility thing, because
Yeah.
I can relate to that too.
Yeah.
Like, you don't want to bring so much attention to yourself. You don't want to be the one that gets called out or that's
Mm-hmm.
embarrassed. So I like have been wondering, like, what did that do for you in the long run too?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is like, then you learn to be invisible in different spaces, and that's
You
not
do.
always a good thing, right? Like, it
Yeah.
can be a protective factor in some spaces, but in other areas of life it can be very limiting.
Yeah. So even though some other jobs will say different, because I'm also very straight out, right, in the way that I am in my personality. Um, but there are spaces where you learn to not rock the boat, right? So, and I remember saying this at one of the scout meetings that we had with the leaders, that I was like, it was during 2020 and all the mess that was happening at the time. And I said, I lived in Texas, and in Texas, I learned that I had a place. So I know my place, right, in the white majority, that I am an immigrant, that I don't have the same voice that a white person does. So even in those spaces that were so-called safe spaces, right, I didn't have a voice in the Kid Scout troop. And because when I would say something, I was looked over. And, you get tired of having to be the feisty one, right? Because that's the way that you're looked at. You're looked as the peleonera, the one that's the feisty one that always has to, oh, you're making such a big deal out of this. And it's like, well, I shouldn't have to make a big deal at all. Like, it should be a given. But unfortunately, you do have to make a big deal in order for you to be seen. Otherwise, you're overlooked. And a lot of times you choose not to, right? You
Mhm.
choose to just get overlooked and not have the fight,
Mhm.
because it's not worth it, right? It's not worth my, and again, you choose your battles, right? So when it's things that don't have to do with life or death, it was like, it's not worth my headache. Like, just let him have it.
Mhm.
Um, but it is a conscious choice. At least for me, I knew that's what I was doing,
Mhm.
right? But I think for a lot of people, they don't know because they're not conscious that that's what they're doing. And that's when I think it becomes problematic.
Mhm.
So there's times where I don't think I knew that I was staying quiet, but I learned to not rock the boat. And I think that was my wound or my challenge, right? How it can be very limiting. It can be very limiting in you not having a voice, not being able to speak up, whether it is for yourself or for your staff or for whatever. And I think a lot of times as immigrants, we stay at jobs sometimes that we shouldn't have stayed for so long because we learn to be invisible,
Yeah.
right? We learn to not use our voice because we're scared. We're scared of what the consequences are going to be, whether that's rejection, right, which is the fear. It's the fear of
Mhm.
rejection.
Mhm.
It's the fear of rejection and the fear of not belonging or not being accepted or yes, being called out. And then you're like, oh shit, am I going to say the right thing or the wrong thing? I don't know, right? You feel on the spot. So that one is really hard, the invisibility one, because even in this what we're doing right now, right? That's why it took me so long too with the business, or sometimes in making decisions as an entrepreneur, you still question,
Yeah.
right? You still question, and it's hard to show your light because the fear or the little voice of like, are they gonna like that? Are they still gonna be accepted? What are they gonna say? And you look at all the different angles. You look at all the different angles in your head when people are not even thinking that. Like, who cares, right? There's all kinds of dumb stuff out there. But we make this problem in our head sometimes that doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's the overthinking, and I think
Yeah.
I can relate to that. There's like overthinking, and there's anxiety that comes from that. There's sensation of, yeah, like I'll obsess over what I said. Oh my God, how are people gonna take it? And then it's like I take that with me for a few days. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
go away. There's that. I think there's also perfectionism.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for me, I went inward and I realized that I could be really good at school. I don't know where that came
Yeah.
from, but I feel like I just became very attached to how, like, doing well in school. And it was, and I felt like my parents made the sacrifice to come here. I want to make them proud. I can't mess up, because
Mm-hmm.
then you
Yeah.
feel like if I mess up, then what was the point of them like leaving home?
Yeah.
So there was this immense pressure to like perform and to do well in school. And I remember I would stay up late and my mom would see me and would tell me to go to sleep, or she'd ask if she could help. And I was mean. I was really rude. And I said, like, you don't understand. Like, you don't know,
They
how to
didn't.
do
Yeah.
this. Like, she would try to help me. And I'd say, that's the wrong way. That's not how, right? Poor mom. She was trying to help. But yeah, I remember like I just became so attached to this perfect image of being like a straight A student and doing really well that when I got to college and got my first D, I like freaked out and I was like, what the hell?
Ooh.
What is this? And it really shook me. And it was in political science of all
Oh, of
classes,
course.
right? Because it was like, what? I never learned about this stuff in high school. Like throughout my life, I was living it,
Yeah.
injustices, all that stuff, but I never like put a name to it. And it was just blowing my mind. And it was hard. And then I shifted, but I remember like, yeah, that experience like really did shake me. And it challenged sort of this perfectionism, right? And I
Yeah.
had to be very like vulnerable. So that's another thing that I've had to also work on, because I think as a kid, I think I didn't allow myself to play as much. I don't know, like I think I was just obsessed with school, and probably also like staying under the radar and doing well and not getting in trouble, that I had a very nerdy like growing up.
Yeah.
I'm grateful for it now. But I feel like I missed out on a lot of stuff.
Yeah. And I think that perfectionism is still there. We're just talking about that,
Yeah.
right? So it still shows up. It shows up at work, it shows up in our relationships, it shows up in our parenting, in our expectations. Um, because those are things that we attach also to our personality. So our performance. So when you're talking about school, did you think that like with your D, it's like, oh, I'm a bad person, or that's
Yeah.
it, I'm a failure because I have a D.
Yeah,
Uh,
totally. Totally. I think it was that, like, I think I just felt this, like, I'm really good at school, and everybody used to tell me that. And
yeah,
I think that was the one thing I knew I was good at. And I didn't know anything else that I was good at. So it really, like, te mueve el tapete, right? When it's
yeah.
like the one thing you're really good at, you're not good at. It's like, oh, when you put all your marbles in one thing. And, I think that's a lot of pressure for a kid to put on themselves and to grow up with that.
That's for sure. Yeah, because we coin it, right? We coin it as that's the value that we have. If I'm bad at
Yeah.
school, then I don't have any value, and that's not true. But again, those are the some of that distorted thinking, right, that we develop because of our experience. And it shows up sometimes. So those are the things that we have to quiet, right? We have to quiet the little voice that comes out that is our, 12-year-old, 7-year-old self, or 20-year-old self. Um, and it's like, nope, thank you. You helped me during that time to survive and make it here, but I no longer need you. So now I'm going to choose to do something different. Because we can, right? And that's the point of this is that we can, because even though it was really hard, we still got some strength from that. So because we survived that experience, it's like, how do we now make sense of the experience or learn the lessons, right? That were taught during those really hard, the experience of immigration and coming to this country and adjusting. What are some of the things that you think you learned, or some of the strengths that you gained because of it?
Yeah. So I look back now and I'm very appreciative of, like, just the diversity of experience that we had.
Mhm.
We got to experience different places, different cultures, different languages, food. And I think that really molded my sense of, like, valuing diversity and equity and fighting for social justice, which is what I've been
Yeah.
doing, right, with my career. So I think all of those things, like learning how to be humble,
Mm-hmm.
no matter who it is that you meet or where you live. So I think I also learned, like, sort of these adaptive strengths. Like, I think as I've gotten older, that's changed, but I feel that I wasn't afraid of change.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've moved so many times. I had to move so many times. We moved as a family so many times. And then when I went to college and then grad school, like, I've just moved a lot and it never scared me. If anything, I think at one point I got used to it and it just became this thing of, like, okay, I'm bored. I want to move. Like, I need to change. Um, Now as I've gotten older, I think change is a little bit scarier than it was before.
Yeah.
But I think those were some of the things. So I just appreciate that we got to see, like, the different parts of the the US. And I'm not gonna go back and live in Texas. I'll tell you that.
Oh
for
no,
sure.
that's for sure.
I
Yeah.
did go back to
Okay,
live
knock
in
on wood.
New York, but yeah. So I think, there are things that, I don't know. Those are some of the things. And then, like you said in the beginning, we haven't talked about this as a family.
No.
I think I asked my parents a few years ago. We went on a road trip somewhere, and I remember asking them, like, "Can you tell me the story? Like, why did we come to the U.S.?" But I never heard your story, like, and I feel so sad, right? That, like, you had that experience and I didn't know it was that bad. And even I feel like a bad little sister because I don't have, like, I don't remember a lot. I was little, but I don't remember a lot about the huge responsibility you had to take on. Like, I
Because
do
you were
remember.
little. I mean, we were just completely different worlds,
Yeah.
So there's no way that you were gonna see it at the time because again, you are just moving along through life. You know what I mean? You're not thinking, oh my God, how does she feel? What is she thinking? Right? Like we do now as parents. I think there's a lot of more conscious parenting, but at that time, we were just surviving. And I think that's most immigrant families. You're just trying to make it. So there is no talk of feelings because,
Yeah.
by the time my parents got home, it was already late. So we just ate dinner and then that's it, right? It was go to sleep. And then the next day started again. right? And it becomes routine, and it just goes the same thing keeps going, it keeps going, it keeps going. So everybody's moving on. There really is no downtime to talk about it. And I think because we didn't really have the language. Obviously,
Yeah.
both of us are educated now, so we
Mhm.
have the language of feelings, which I didn't learn until I went to,
I'm still
to
learning
college.
it. I'm still learning it. Yeah.
Till I went to college. That's where I did a lot of my emotional healing. Was my major was psychology at first, before it was social work, all through my undergrad, um, until I discovered social work. But so that's where I did most of my healing, and I didn't have the language. So I think most families don't have the language, and I think that's the point of this talks, right? That we're bringing awareness to these things that are unspoken, um, because we just move on with life. But just because we move on with life doesn't mean that it wasn't hurtful, and it doesn't mean that um, that it's not impacting us still now. Because that wound of the what you're wearing, yeah, I remember very much. I was thinking, like, when we moved to Texas, it was my senior year. It sucked again because finally adjusting, right? And then we moved, and I just did my senior year in Texas. We couldn't even speak Spanish. It was against the regulations of the school to speak Spanish in the school. So you will get a paddle, right? They still do physical punishment over there. So they had the little paddles hanging in the school, in the principal's office, and they will give you the option. Do you want the paddle, or do you want us to call you parents? I think half the time the parents didn't even know that you got the paddle. Thank God I never got it. But those are the things I think about as an immigrant too, right? Like, we couldn't even use our language. And at the time, I mean, we were, what, 4 years in, our fourth year in the US. So we had to learn Texan too. To learn Texan too, in order to adapt. So I think some of the things that we've gained from it is adaptability, because you do have to learn. So obviously that can be a hindrance too when you are just camouflaging or chameleon yourself. But I see it as a strength, because I think that's what's opened some doors for me, or in communication, in friendships, and even in college, in entering rooms and not being intimidated by people that look different than you. Because, yeah, we were exposed to so many different cultures, when we were in New York. And the moving again, because you have to be humble, right, to be able to adapt, to ask questions, to learn the language, because obviously we didn't know English when we first got here. We had to learn it. So being able to observe. So you learn to watch people. You learn to navigate, I think, certain circles that may be uncomfortable, but because we move so much, I think we were able to feel comfortable in those spaces where other people might not. And I see that because I've seen that with friends sometimes, where they're like, how come you're not, I'm like, oh, I don't know, do you know that person? No, I don't know that person. But I talk to everybody. I talk to anybody, and I think that comes with a sense of comfort that you only gain when you are in spaces where people look different than you. And that's when you don't feel as uncomfortable, even in traveling, right? Because somehow in traveling, like when we went to Italy with my friends, I was somehow the spokesperson. I'm like, I only know as much as you. We're talking about. But it was that comfort that you gain, I think, from that's one of the strengths I see, the comfort in being in different spaces.
I think it's having to constantly get out of your comfort zone, right?
You're pushed, yeah.
Like that moves for you, that changes, like what comfort means changes.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You're adaptable, right?
You're
So
adaptable.
which that's a skill that you have to learn in life, because life is not constant. It changes. Grief and loss. I mean, I've experienced grief, and that was one of the hardest ones, but I've experienced grief and loss in my life many times. Um, Not just with death, but just in life circumstances. So that taught me that it's survivable, right? So that the black hole that you have in your heart, eventually you move on from it, that you're able to move on. So even though it was a very difficult lesson, because it's obviously not fun, and I definitely don't want to go back there. It was ugly and lonely and dark. Um, but it definitely, I don't know, made me tougher, I guess, in a
Mhm.
sense, but it also reassure me that no matter how dark it looks, it still passes.
Mm.
But you also have to put efforts to it,
Mhm.
right? Like in you talking about school, I'm thinking back of school. School was hard. I mean, oh my God. I remember sitting there with my little dictionary, English,
Mhm.
Spanish dictionary, having to translate first to Spanish, whatever the hell the homework was, and then having to translate my homework after I wrote it in Spanish back to English, so that I can turn it in. And it took forever. Like it took, oh my gosh, so long. Um, but that helped me also to learn English fast
Mm.
because in a year I learned English. I was in mainstream.
That's
It,
crazy.
when I
Yeah.
started high school, I was already in mainstream. My poor brother and you were just straight mainstream. He was all excused the first year. Or were you bilingual the first?
I think I was bilingual the first
Just
year.
the first
And
year.
then
Yeah, Ronald was, and I remember seeing his report. I was like, excuse, excuse. He didn't learn anything. Her poor brother. He learned English faster than us, spoken. but but yeah, school was really hard. But again, it's tenacity. I think tenacity because we had to keep moving, right?
grit.
And grit.
Grit, I think, is
Yeah.
definitely a life skill.
Mm-hmm. Grit, humbleness for sure. Taking the punches, right? And talking about trying to fit in. I remember the first time I shaved my legs because I had friends that, some of my classmates were in the theater. They were like the theater
The
club or
drama.
whatever, drama club.
Mhm.
And I was sitting there, and of course, they're more popular, right? I
Mhm.
wasn't the popular one, and yes, we dress weird. We were the ones that dress weird. I remember I made a skirt one time. I loved that skirt, but who makes their own
Mhm.
clothes, right? Me. Uh,
Creative. And you used to paint your jeans, and we used to share a room at one point,
yeah,
and I used to want to wear your clothes. I did used to wear them. I didn't tell you.
yeah. So, hey, that's all right. I'm glad that they fit you, right? But I remember having a conversation with them, and they're like, "Oh, I hate those girls, that are just have such hairy
Oh
legs."
my
And I was wearing my little skirt that I had made, and I was just looking at them like, "Oh, but not you, not you." And I was like, "This bitches."
god. Mean girls.
I was like, "Oh, hell no." So what did I do? I went home and I shaved my legs. And then, again, it's part of trying to belong and trying to not be the weird one, even though you're still the weird one. I mean, come on, we just we tried.
Well, in Texas,
We tried.
Texas was a whole other experience. I
Oh
don't know how
Lord.
much time we have, but
Okay, we can do part two.
Texas was a whole other experience. And I remember, like, I was still in elementary school, but they had a full on football team, cheerleading squad. And I was like, what is this? And that's when I think I started to see, like, the whole being popular, not being popular. That was traumatic for me. And I think it didn't help with the whole self image and, like, my self worth because I had my best friend. I won't say her name, but I remember my best friend. We were like so tight. We did everything together. And then at one point, she decided that she wanted to be the popular girl.
Mm.
And I was not fitting in that picture. And she wanted to be a cheerleader. So she could no longer be my friend. And she just stopped talking to me. And I remember feeling so confused and so hurt. And there was this one little boy who I recently learned now is like a famous drag queen and was on the runway, like that show with RuPaul and won. Because I was like, oh my god, that's that little boy that bullied me.
Little punk.
Yeah, but I remember he had a birthday party and I was like, can I go? And he was like, no, straight up no. I was like, oh my god. But anyway, and so yeah, that was hard. I think at that point I was what, like 7 or 8? No, I was 9 or 10. I was like
Yeah.
9, 10.
You were still elementary school,
I
but
was
you were
9,
like
10.
fourth, fifth grade.
But yeah, so that was hard. And I remember the cheerleaders also making fun of me and this other girl. They were very, so I was the only one that spoke Spanish in the whole school.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was this other black girl and her brother who were like the only two black people, and they lived on our block, so we were friends and we were playing with Barbies, and they were started making fun of us because we were playing with Barbies, and I was like, what the hell? But I didn't understand racism and all of that back then. So looking back, I was like, oh my god,
You went through
Texas
so
was
much.
so racist.
Oh, I remember my dad's story. We had to go and fight them.
Yeah, so in New York, right away they skipped me a grade, and in Texas they wanted to put me back. I don't know if one or two grades, and so my dad went and like after work, and he used to work in a welding
It's a
place
foundry.
or a foundry.
Making airplane parts. So it was like big old ovens, pobrecito. That's, the jobs that you have as an immigrant too, right? It's whatever's available at the time. And yeah, he worked in a foundry. So this is Texas. It's hot as hell. And he had to wear this like spacesuit looking kind of thing where there's no air conditioner because they're working with giant ovens making like airplane parts. It was crazy and earning less than $2 an hour. So
Yeah, so he showed up straight out of work, and he was, kind of dirty from being at work, and he showed up like that to the school and started yelling at the principal because they had already tried talking to them, and they kept telling my mom, "No, we have to put her back. She's too young." And I remember my dad going in there yelling, and he straight up said to her, like, "Are you being racist? Is this because we're Latinos? Like, is that why you want to put her back?" Her tone of voice changed when he said that. And he basically told her, like, "My daughter is very smart. Like, test her. Put her in the grade she's supposed to be in a year, and if she can't keep her grades up, then you can put her back." And I remember that's probably also part of where this pressure comes from, right? Of like, I don't want to disappoint my parents, and I want to show these people that I can do it. And I think that just stuck with me. But yeah, that was intense. Like there was a lot of stuff that happened in Texas, that I was just like, oh my God, it's a whole other world.
well, you went to an Ivy League school, so screw you, Texas. I forgot what the name of your school is, but screw you, people from there. In your face,
Galloway. It was Galloway
Galloway.
Elementary.
In your face, Galloway. For
I don't know why.
being so discriminatory. Oh my gosh, they were terrible. But yeah, those are the fights, right? Those are some of the fights and thank God for my parents that, that they had the fight in them, that they went and stood up for us. Otherwise, it would just be another one of the ones that look over. I mean, I think back about in high school, I remember going to the counselor and I love math, the math nerd. Don't ask me any more about math. I don't remember. Okay. But I was really good at geometry. So I remember that in the Regents test in New York, I was number 2 in the state. So in the test, I was number 2 in the state. This was in 10th grade. So come to 11th grade, we're meeting with the counselors about college, all these things, right? And I go in there and she's like, "Oh yeah, you should be a cosmetologist." I was like, "What the fuck? Like, it's crazy." And she's like, "Yeah, because that way you can help out your parents." And I'm like,
Help them do what?
Exactly.
Like financially or what?
Yeah. So
Oh.
she's like, "Oh, you should just be a cosmetologist." I'm like, "Yeah, I don't want to do that. I don't know how to cut straight for my life, so I don't know what kind of cosmetologist I will be, first of all, but I wouldn't be a good one." And my other friend, I had two friends, my other two nerd friends, also immigrants. They were actually in honors classes and what is it called? The other classes, AP classes. And she told them the same thing. One was from Colombia, one was from Nicaragua. And we all come out and we say, "Can you believe this, person? Like, what? She told me so and so." And we're like, "Yes, me too. What the hell?" It's like we had so much potential, Thank God, right? I didn't listen because I knew I could do better. Um, but she was not helpful. So even at that in the school, the way that they look at you and your potential and it's not the best, right? When you are dealing with these counselors that
I have a story too, which is funny because that was like I don't know how many years later, and your story was in New York.
That was in New York.
And my story is here in Lakewood, and where I went to high school. And I was AP in honors classes, but I decided not to take AP Lit or English or whatever it is the last year. I was in a regular, or I think an honors English class. And that's where they would start giving you like the applications for college. So I remember my friends that were in the AP class were like, "Oh, it's time, go to the office and get your application," because they would go to the classes and give them out, and they didn't come to our class. So I had to go to the office, and when I asked the lady, she asked me what class I was in, and she was like, "We don't have any more applications for the UCs and the Cal States." And at this point, I didn't know anything about applying, but we were I don't know if you remember, I did this program where they helped us apply for college. It was for like Latinas, and so anyway, so I went, and they were like, "Oh, we don't have any more." Okay, this other girl who was a cheerleader and was in the AP English class was in the same program I was, so she went to ask right after I did, and they gave her the freaking UC and
Mm,
counseling applications. And I was like, this is so ridiculous. It's very much a track system where,
yeah.
like, if you don't fit a certain, standard, they're not going to help you get there. And that was really sad. I mean, that was now
Yeah.
in the late 90s.
Yeah.
But I still hear stories of kids, right, that get treated a certain way.
Yeah. So don't give up, kids. Okay. And parents, yes, support your kids. I know you don't know how it works for a lot of you. Like we were, I was the first generation, right? So I had no idea what to do either. I don't know. I just winged it. My parents didn't know either. They'd never been to college. We're in a different country. They don't know how it works. So you kind of wing it.
But I learned from you.
Yeah.
So I think that was another como say advantage that I had is
Yeah.
because you were the oldest, you were the guinea pig that had to figure everything
Yeah.
out for all of us, for our
Yeah.
parents too. And then by the time it was my turn, like all of that, helped me. So thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. Oh yeah. Some of the honors of being the older sister, right? That you get to pave the way. You get to pave the way. And you get your own experiences. So our parents do the best they can, with what they got. So I'm grateful to them, because they definitely did again the best that they could, with what they had, in supporting us in their own way, of getting us there. So, but it was hard. It was really hard. We learned, I think, a lot, and definitely some of the strengths, like adaptability, grit, curiosity, because you also have to be curious, to learn. In order for you to learn, the openness to learning a new language, learning a new system, learning different languages, because we had to learn Puerto Rican and we had to learn Dominican,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
in order to be able to fit in, as well, right? It wasn't just English, it was also the different ways, the people that lived in our neighborhood, we had to communicate like them. Like I said, in Texas, we had to learn Texan, I definitely some pins. I still remember coming home and saying, Mom, I need some pins, right? Like the pins. And then here I come, right? With a bunch of pins. And they're like, oh, what is that for? And I said, you said we needed some pins. And they're like, no, some pins. Oh, pens. Okay. Sorry, Texas. I don't mean to drag on you, but that was part of my learning. Right? I'm like, oh, okay. So you have to learn to navigate and to, yes, be humble, right, and just laugh at stuff, because if you don't laugh, I don't know, it's hard.
It's hard to get through.
It's hard to get through it, but the different experiences I think are important to highlight too. That you just don't know, right? You don't know what you don't know. Um, in being the youngest, like what my experience was. My parents' experience was also hard, because then we were there crying, being moody teenager, you also crying, I want to go home. Um, that must have been so hard for them to be able to console us, because they can't. They can't console us.
That, and they had their own grief that
Yeah.
we probably, they didn't show us.
Yeah.
Or at least I don't remember. Maybe they showed in other ways, but yeah.
Yeah, because you just move on. So I think it's a good time to wrap up, and just we want to validate you if that was your experience, if you, left your country and came here, or even if you just moved, because I think even moving sometimes within the US, right? You are living your lifestyle behind for a new lifestyle. And new neighborhood, new way of living. Definitely Texas is another world. New York is another world. But leaving your homeland, my gosh, it's hard. It's really hard. And so I want to validate your experience, everybody. And if you're tapping into your own wounds or your own, learning experiences from your own experience in immigration, in moving, to a different country than yours, thank you so much for taking the time to listen, and also for looking at your own experience and pulling your strengths from it, because that's what I want to leave you with, is that I want you to know that even though it is hard, if this is recent for you, it's gonna pass, right? The black hole, like I said, in my heart, it's closed because I eventually did make new friends, but I had to be open to making new friends too, you know, and be able to look at that, or to, like I said, just be open. I had to be open to new experiences in order for me to be able to move forward. Otherwise, you just get stuck in the grief forever. So don't get stuck in the grief forever. The grief is there, the hole is there. But as you move on with life and as you open up your heart to new experiences, it gets easier. And then you're able to thrive, because I mean, both of us, we have master's degrees, we have our families,
We have a career
we
that we're proud
yeah,
of.
that we're proud of. So you have to be open. And there are sacrifices that you make sometimes at the beginning, sometimes that it's your choice, right? And sometimes they're given to you, like with me and being the parentified one. But it is how you navigate it, the way that you're going to be successful or not, right? At least emotionally. So I validate your pain, your grief, your a-hole friends. They should have done better by you. But life continues. So open your heart to joy, open your heart to new experiences, and definitely pull your strengths from it, because there's a ton of strengths. I mean, we touched just on a few, but there's a ton of strengths that we pull from our own experience with moving here to the US. So thank you so much. Thank you, sister,
Thank
for
you
having
for
this
having
conversation.
me. Yeah, to all the first gen kids out there. I'm 1.5 generation, but hang in there. You got this.
Yep, you got this for sure. Don't listen to your counselors if they're telling you to go be a cosmetologist, unless that's your art. That's for sure. Definitely was not mine. Was not my art. But thank you so much, everyone, and we'll see you here next time. Nancy, want to say anything else?
No, I just want to say thank you for creating this space, and thank you for being my big sister.
Oh, sister.
Yeah, and for being that third parent that I think a lot of times you were the first parent.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
Thank you, sister. Love you.
Love you too.
Thank you, everybody. See you next time. This podcast may cover sensitive topics related to mental health that could be emotionally activating for some of you. And if you feel overwhelmed while listening, please pause and seek support. Here are some resources for you. You can call the Suicide Prevention Lifeline by calling 988 or texting 988, and they have 24/7 support. You can also text the crisis text line by texting HOME to 741741. And for international support, you can visit befrienders.org for global helplines. Your well-being is important to us, so please reach out if you need any help.